The reason why we were so afraid is quite apparent. As we
Hello,
witness
everybody.
the destruction.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. Welcome to November. Welcome to Standard Time in the USA. Okay. When people talk about A Course in Miracles, when practitioners talk about it, teachers talk about it, students talk about it, whatever you want to call the people who study A Course in Miracles, they talk about a lot of things. They talk about forgiveness. They talk about love. They talk about healing. They talk about getting guidance. Sometimes, less frequently, but sometimes they use the more religious terms. They talk about God. They talk about Jesus, maybe Holy Spirit, maybe concepts like the atonement. But I don't hear people talking frequently ever about freedom. And I find that kind of puzzling. Why don't we talk about freedom? When somebody asks you what A Course in Miracles is about, do you ever think to say it's really about freedom? No, people don't say that. However, if you look at the Course and search through the Course, you find something very interesting. First of all, freedom, or freedoms, as a word, is mentioned 216 times in A Course in Miracles. I mean, that's quite a number of times. But not only is there that, the word free, or some derivation of the word free, like freeze, or freely, or freeing, or freed, is mentioned 431 times. That's a lot. And then remember that you don't have to necessarily use the word free or freedom to be talking about freedom. Sometimes you can use an opposite word if you're making an opposite point. So you might say prison or imprison. So the word prison or imprison is in the Course 115 times. Slave or enslaved is in the Course 46 times. The word tyranny is in the Course 7 times. If you add up all the things I just said, that's 815 times when A Course in Miracles is actually teaching us something about freedom. I mean, that's huge. This is a huge A Course in Miracles concept. I didn't do a count on forgiveness, but I would say it's right up there with forgive or forgiveness, maybe even love. So this is one of the most, or maybe the most prominent idea, value in A Course in Miracles, yet I never hear people talking about how A Course in Miracles is a course on freedom. There's so many Course in Miracles quotations about freedom, it was very hard to pick even just a few, but let's take one that was in the reading that Reverend Steve read. Freedom cannot be learned by tyranny of any kind, and the perfect equality of all God's sons cannot be recognized through the dominion of one will over the other. So, perfect freedom. That's what we're here to achieve. And we will never achieve it if we think that one will can overpower another will. With an election coming up in the United States this coming Tuesday, I think this is the perfect time to have a discussion about freedom. It's certainly the perfect time to think about how important it is not to have one will or one group's will overpower and have dominion over another group's will. And a lot of politics, seems to be that. The Democrats want to have their will be the dominant one, having dominion over the others, and the Republicans do exactly the same thing. They want to have their will be the dominant one and have the dominion over the other. And I don't need that to be any different than that is. I wish it wasn't so pronounced. And maybe we will evolve back and swing a little bit back the pendulum of not being so divisive and thinking that one's will is good and the other will is evil. I'm affirming that and hoping that maybe even this election will give us some of that. I've heard a lot about the election, a lot of people saying democracy is on the ballot. Democracy will be on the ballot this coming Tuesday here in the United States. The interesting thing is I've heard both sides say that. Both sides do agree with something, that democracy is on the ballot. Maybe it's true. If both sides agree, there must be some truth to it, because it does seem to be the rhetoric on both sides. Liberty. Liberty is a great idea, and that's something that we focus in on in the United States of America, and it's something we hopefully focus in on election day. I mean, having an election is one of the great techniques we have to ensure that liberty is preserved. Let's define liberty. You look liberty up in the dictionary. It says the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behavior, and political views. So, liberty, it's important. That's being free in our society and not having strict or harsh restrictions being imposed on us by those in authority. So, in a large part, the election is somewhat about that. That's something to think about. Now, Course in Miracles doesn't use the word liberty much. It does a couple of times, but it uses much more the word freedom in all those derivations that I told you. And the one quote about freedom that I probably quote the most often, because it was really profound for me and really helped me in my stance about freedom, is this one. Yet the argument that underlies the defense of freedom is perfectly valid. Because it is true, it should not be fought for, but it should be sided with. So A Course in Miracles certainly is not about fighting for freedom. Fighting for freedom indicates an us versus them. It's just more separation. But that does not mean that we do not side with freedom, that we do not side with liberty. And I certainly side with freedom, and I certainly side with liberty, and I am going to take that awareness to me when I go to the polls on Tuesday. I have been guided not to participate in early voting. I actually like going to the polls. I've talked about that. Unless I'm not going to be in town that day and can't make it to the poll, I want to go to the poll and participate in that process, because to me it's about relationships. It's about my relationships with those poll workers and saying hi to them, and just my relationship to the Holy Spirit when I go into that little funky little booth that they set up and pull the curtain back and just ask the Holy Spirit for guidance on every little black mark that I make on that very long ballot that we have here in California. So the idea of liberty, there's a very famous quotation that was apparently uttered by Revolutionary War activist Patrick Henry, said it publicly in a big meeting in 1775. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death. Give me liberty or give me death." Okay, now at that meeting, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington were also in attendance. And what Patrick Henry was lobbying for was for the colony at that time of Virginia to send troops to the Revolutionary Army that was being massed. And apparently his rousing spirit helped convince the colony of Virginia to send troops to that Revolutionary Army, and possibly, had something to say about how the Revolutionary War ended up with the colonies winning. So that's something to remember. I like that. I don't know if even people are being taught things like that. I was taught that quote when I was in school. And as I said earlier, liberty, freedom is maintained through elections. So give me liberty and give me an election. Give me an election where I can go and, to the best of my ability, as imperfect as it all is, cast my vote and make my voice be heard, and then be open to the votes and the voices of the others. The Patrick Henry quotation, talks about death and talks about fighting. Course in Miracles certainly just told us not to fight for freedom, not to fight for liberty, but to side with it. So let me paraphrase the Patrick Henry quotation so that it seems more A Course in Miracles friendly. Give me liberty and give me life. I mean, that's basically what he was saying, that liberty is indeed life, and that a life in slavery isn't really much of a life. It's certainly not a life lived to its full potential. So we need liberty to be able to live our lives to our full potential, and imprisoned life is not really much of a life at all. And if you think about it, the United States of America has, sitting in New York Harbor, a wonderful monument to liberty. It's Lady Liberty, the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty, by the way, was initially launched or opened on October 28th, 1886, so quite a while ago. And actually, the name of the Statue of Liberty is not the Statue of Liberty. It has an actual name. The name is Liberty Enlightening the World. Liberty Enlightening the World. And the depiction of liberty is this anthropomorphized woman, a goddess of sorts. And so liberty is anthropomorphized into a woman. There's something that we can use when people say that the men have captured all the symbols of power. Well, they didn't capture Lady Liberty. Lady Liberty is portrayed as a woman, and I think that goes back to some Roman goddess thing. I'm not quite sure about that, but it has Roman goddess roots. Lady Liberty, of course, shines a light. She's got the torch up. She's shining the light, and she's about enlightenment. So, I mean, it's something that we spiritual people can truly embrace, about the light and enlightenment. She holds in her hand this tablet. It's called the Tabula Ansata, which is Latin, I believe, for a tablet with handles. So she holds the tablet with handles, and on the tablet is the inscripted date of July 4th, 1776. It's all in Roman numerals, but it's the date, of course, of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The Statue of Liberty, or Liberty Enlightening the World, was designed by a French sculptor named Frédéric Bertholdi, and the metalwork inside the Statue of Liberty was built by Gustave Eiffel, who of course is also famous for the Eiffel Tower. And the Statue of Liberty, or Liberty Enlightening the World, took 20 years to get constructed, from its conception to when it was finally assembled in the New York Harbor. And during that time, the money had to be raised for it. Generally we think of, it was a gift from the French to the people of the United States. And that's kind of true, but it's only a very small part of the story. It wasn't really a gift of the French government. It was a gift from the French people, though I think the government had a little bit in it. But the torch and the head and the crown were built before the statue, and they toured around, and people paid a little bit of money to go inside of them and look at them. And that's one of the big ways that the money was raised. And then after that had been around France for a few times, then they brought it to the United States, and money was then raised that way. And there were other ways money was raised, because the United States had to pay for the pedestal base that the statue was to sit on top of, or stand on top of. And that's, a massive structure. One of the things that people don't know about the Statue of Liberty is that it was actually inspired by the ending of slavery in the United States. That's what was going on in the late 1860s, when the French got the idea of giving us this gift. They were in part celebrating the United States finally releasing themselves from the shackles of slavery. And because we usually view the statue from below, we don't know, or we don't see, that the Statue of Liberty has at its feet broken chains and a broken shackle. So that's supposed to symbolize that the shackles, and the shackles is the part that goes around, the foot. So the shackles and the chains of slavery have now been broken, and liberty and freedom is striding throughout the Americas. That's a really beautiful idea. When you think about the Enlightenment, I think we can all embrace the Statue of Liberty. I visited the Statue of Liberty. It's very inspiring. If you've never visited it, it's really a wonderful reason to go to New York City. Go. Take the ferry. Go to the Statue of Liberty. It's really inspiring to be there. When I was there, it was after 9/11. They weren't allowing anybody inside the statue. So I hope to go there again someday, so that I can actually get in the statue and maybe get up to the crown. You can't go up to the torch anymore, but you can still go up to the crown. And I would like to do that. So that's something on a list for me, on my life list. I don't like to call it a bucket list, but on my life list, I want to go inside the Statue of Liberty. So freedom and liberty, very important ideals and values for me personally. And I think about that. I remember that, Reverend Tony, I'm a child of the 60s. I lived very formative years in the 1960s. And the 1960s were a decade when freedom was really being questioned and championed and embraced. And I certainly took to all of that. I mean, I certainly embraced the freedom of being able to live an alternative lifestyle. So, I'm a polyamorous, which is non-monogamous, bisexual person. I've always been open about that my whole adult life. And I wanted the freedom to be able to live that way. And basically, I would say that I have the freedom to live that way. Though I was a supporter of gay marriage, I certainly wanted gays to have every right and privilege that heterosexual people have. I'm not too keen on marriage as a whole, because one, I've never been married, and also marriage laws, the way they exist in our society, discriminate against single people. And I'm a single person. And I don't think single people should be discriminated against financially, legally, because of lifestyle choices that they make. So while I am certainly a person who embraced gay marriage, I think marriage as a whole, as an institution that grants legal advantages and financial advantages to a certain class of the people making a certain lifestyle choice, I question all of that. I don't think it's particularly the time to have that political discussion, but I hope someday we as a society and as a government stop giving legal and financial advantages to some people and depriving them from some other people like me. So there is that. The 60s embraced free love. You never hear that term anymore, but free love really just meant that you could be sexual without the commitment of marriage and maybe be sexual in a more open and fluid way. But it also embraced free speech. Free speech is a big issue right now. Let me clear something up about free speech. Free speech doesn't mean you're free to say anything. You're not free to say something that's illegal. Certain things are illegal to say. You wouldn't publicly say, I think all Jewish people should be killed. You don't say things like that. That free speech isn't giving anybody the right to say things like that. That's hate speech. Free speech doesn't mean you can say hate speech. It doesn't mean that you can say seditious speech, which is, speech about the overthrow of the government. You can't, advocate the overthrow of the government just because of free speech. So, let's get really clear about that. Free speech is, doesn't mean you can go into a crowded movie theater and yell fire. Doesn't mean that. But it does mean that you should have the freedom to be able to express your political views and moral views without feeling that you're going to be discriminated against in some way, shape, or manner. And this is a great discussion that is going on in the world right now. And, we have these lawsuits against the federal government because they contest that agencies of the federal government conspired with big tech companies to limit the speech of various people, doctors and other people who were expressing ideas counter to the narrative that was being embraced by the government. So these are very interesting times for freedom and for discussions about freedom. And everybody should be able to have those discussions and have their views. People have different views about abortion. We've talked about that. I've talked about that. This is a time when people can have those discussions. And the election coming up is a time when maybe you can vote your values so that the people who mirror your values more are the ones that become the legislatures. And so maybe your values win the day in the legislature. So, freedom and liberty, elections, they're all put together. So I can think that I was molded by the 60s. However, it's not really the A Course in Miracles idea. The truth is, I wasn't molded by the 60s. The truth is, possibly, my soul decided to incarnate now because it resonated. It was like magnetically drawn to the energy of the 60s to live through because it was in harmony with my views. The Course says, perhaps you think you did not make the world, but came unwillingly to what was made already, hardly waiting for your thoughts to give it meaning. Yet in truth, you found exactly what you looked for when you came. So, we're not necessarily molded by our environment. We were attracted to environments that resonated with us, and we were also attracted to them so that we could actually be a part of the manifesting of that environment. So it isn't that the 60s made me the way I am. It's actually more truthful to say I made the 60s the way it was. My values contributed to the 60s becoming that decade of freedom and liberty that it was. And I'm happy to be a part of that manifestation. Okay, Course in Miracles has some other great thoughts. Remember I said you don't have to necessarily have freedom in the teaching in order for it to be about freedom. This is another one of my favorite Course teachings about freedom. It says, you must still choose freely to devote yourself to the greater restoration. As long as a single slave remains to walk the earth, your release is not complete. Complete restoration of the sonship is the only goal of the miracle-minded. So as long as anyone doesn't have freedom, as long as there's a single slave walking the world, our release isn't complete. Complete restoration, and what else is restoration but healing? So complete healing of the entire sonship is the only goal that a miracle worker can actually have. And I see that as my goal. And I see that as resonating with the 60s that I not only lived through, but helped manifest. So I want complete healing. I want complete freedom. I want complete liberty. And I embrace being a child of the 60s. I embrace being part of the energy that manifested the 60s as the freedom, liberty decade that it was. And I think it's great that I am studying and a practitioner of a spiritual discipline that has 815 different teachings about freedom in it. And I intend to make that known more than it is known in the A Course in Miracles community. It's a course on freedom. And I found it, and I am grateful. But another way of thinking of that is I manifested it. In essence, I was part of the energy that wrote it. So of course it says what it says, because those are my views and those are my values. And you know what else is interesting about it? A Course in Miracles was scribed during the 60s. During that decade of liberty and freedom, A Course in Miracles was birthed into the world. So if you can hold some of those thoughts over the next week, if you haven't already voted, you live in the United States, I encourage you to exercise your freedom, exercise your liberty, and go and vote. It's a great thing. Okay, that's my talk for the day. Thank you very much.
See, the reason why we were so afraid is quite apparent as we witness the destruction we have made. We nod to heaven